Las Concurla. Might I first of all, as others have, thank those who have sat in that chair at different stages for their courtesy and kindness to myself over the very long period I was here in this chamber, 25 years, in the Shannon, another 9 years, and indeed since I stood first 42 years ago, I am indebted not just for the courtesy of members of this House, both staff and ushers and others, but also on occasion for their kindness as well. So gan bhuigas ó crí agus comala shindas ne macholeakehe harna blianta. What I have to say this evening, I want to take advantage of the wide range of speeches that have preceded me, including those on Dail reform. Nevertheless, I want to just also concentrate on what I feel are, I think, some of the contextual background to what we're discussing today. First of all, may I say that it is very important that the next government, which I wish well, it's a government I hope to look at from a distance. I've said already that I'm very grateful for the kindness and courtesy of my colleagues in this House over the years. I hope not to be quite saying a goodbye to them, and if I succeed in getting the Labour Party's nomination for the presidency, I look forward to meeting you all in your constituencies in a less formal setting. The background when I came in here in when I first stood for election in 1969, I was very conscious of something that is important to me. And that was I was leaving an academic world which I had spent a great deal of time and anxiety to secure entry to. People from backgrounds like mine did not go to university, did not qualify in other universities, and certainly did not teach in universities. But I left that to participate in public life, which was part of the tradition of my family. But also, I want to say, just not to dwell on that, but to simply say, I do wish people from all walks of life took part in politics and took part in public life. I think it is very important to act in the public space with whatever, as Connolly would put it, are the gifts of hand or brain that one has, and to deliver it for one's fellow citizens. I was conscious in 1969 too, however, of the great failure which I could feel in relation to the institutional structure, in relation to a country that then called itself a republic. I believe no real republic has been created in Ireland. I think that the failure has been of three kinds. I think there has been a failure in making Republican political power, a failure in making Republican any kind of administrative power, and a failure in relation to communicative power. Without being technical about each of these, I feel that those who wanted Ireland to be independent would have envisaged a country in which there would be far greater distribution of power, that it wouldn't be just confined, for example, to the exercise of parliamentary democracy only. Parliamentary democracy is incredibly important. It is something that for many years people in Ireland struggled to have their own parliament and struggled to participate in that. But there is more to political power than voting once every 4 or 5 years. There's the exercise of power in every dimension of life. And if a real republic had been founded, we should have been spending decades extending and deepening political power. To the credit of the Labour Party, that has been its mandate, or that has been its intention, that it's been its aspiration, however achieved, since it was founded in 1912. In relation to administrative power, it is quite appalling that there was no real change from the time that the Treasury dominated in the olden days in the handover to the Department of Finance. I find it quite extraordinary as a political scientist that so much attention has focused on changing the electoral system, for example, and so little on the structure of cabinet power. There is no constitutional basis for the hegemony of the Department of Finance. It was a practice that flowed seamlessly from the British Treasury, adopted without question. Again, if one wanted to, for example, change things radically, you would break the connection between the monopoly that is enjoyed by the government of the day and Parliament. That is, you would allow, for example, then you would flow from that, you would establish a committee system which would have the right to initiate legislation, change legislation, and if one wanted to go further in the Scandinavian model, that one could allow it, for example, to have limited budgetary powers, thus ensuring people who came into politics a career in politics separate from being on the front bench if you're in opposition or being in cabinet if you are in government. These are real reforms, but they are empty, missing from the discourse. Rather, I get the impression that even though the Labour Party, for example, has produced 140 proposals, which I so strongly support, including particularly its proposals on citizenship, I find generally there is an element of fright in what elected people are suggesting, as if, in fact, they are offering themselves for reform, as if that was, in fact, the major problem. That is not the problem. And I want, while I am here, to say about where I think this is going, having spent my lifetime not just in elected politics, but also in academic politics and the social sciences, another area of great failure, I believe, in relation to it, say that as a founding member of the Irish Sociological Association, the Irish Political Science Association. What is happening internationally, and we need only watch television or listen to it on the radio, is that an enormous price is now already being paid for the broken connection between the aspirations of the people of this planet and those who take decisions on their behalf. The distinguished political scientist Jürgen Habermas has suggested that really you can invite people to be bound by rules and bound by decisions in which they have had a chance to consciously participate. In one part of the world after another, we have the assumption that rational parliaments will be able to solve global problems, be it in terms of the food crisis, the environmental crisis, the energy crisis, or whatever. And at the same time, we have very serious people who actually people the academy suggesting that it is Parliament that is irrational and that markets are rational, when in fact all of the evidence is that it is the kind of the flow of international market for international capital, totally unaccountable, that is irrational. There is no evidence since the crash of 1929 of the 1920s in the United States that can show one jot of evidence, as Professor Samuelson has done, both Samuelson Senior and Junior. There is no evidence for the rationality of markets. There is strong evidence for the speculative consequences of markets. On the other hand, people have put all their trust in parliaments, and all over the world, Parliament is losing. In the European Union, for example, what is at the present time, we are in the gravest danger of sinking back to a common market rather than a Europe beyond wars, which might have been a Europe of all of the citizens. The citizen deficit in Europe is its most serious failure. That is why those who want to defend their banks, be they French presidents or be they chancellors in Germany, who are defending their banks rather than the possibilities of Europe, put us in such danger in relation to the European project. And then even in relation to Ireland, where, as I said, there was great opportunity missed of building a real inclusive republic that would have reformed the relationship of cabinet to the Dáil structures, that would have had a democratic local government, that would have allowed opportunities for participation. There has, in fact, been a political failure in relation to the establishment of a republic. There has been an administrative failure, where administrative structures are hierarchical, patriarchal. And you know, when I hear all of the people speaking about the clash between being a legislator and being a representative, and the consequences of clientelism that I wrote about in the 1970s, this is because of an authoritarian administrative system that never saw the citizen in the French Republican sense of being an equal. It was because the relationship of the citizen with the state system was in fact devalued. And then there's a communicative power, where there's absolutely no connection between the vulnerability, the struggle, and at the present time the agony of ordinary people and the description of what is news, of what is in fact actually happening in the world in which they inhabit. They do not have equal access to the story. Rather, it is in fact those who work. I was Minister for Broadcasting, but it isn't an Irish case. Right across Europe, right across the Western world, people will tell you that they almost in fact have to have a kind of applied cynicism to the question of presenting what people in the viewing or listening publics will accept as the news of the day. This kind of artificial connection between what is moral and what is ethical is incredibly dangerous. It is widening an excluded underclass in Ireland. It is creating people who will move quickly to conflict because there are no mediating institutions in Europe. And in one country after another, right across Africa and Asia, as people overthrow dictatorships, they place first their trust in representative institutions, and then if they are let down, they are into a straight conflict with what are regarded as the forces of law and order. The result is war and the waste of human and other resources in the terrible tasks of war. I say this not to depress anybody, but to simply say I have had a belief all of my life, since I was a child, in County Clare, in the power of education, in the power of ideas and so forth. But I believe an enormous high price has been paid for a kind of anti-intellectualism and a kind of authoritarianism in Irish culture. And I believe now we need, therefore, to draw one conclusion. We need not to suggest that that which has failed us should or can be repaired. That is why the Labour Party, leading a government, is incredibly important. We need now to go back and recover the promise of a real republic that would be built on citizenship, that would reject as outrageous in a republic the kind of radical individualism that is epitomised in that ugly statement of Michael McDowell's that inequality is needed for the stability of society. It ranks there like that mad Margaret Thatcher's view that there is no such thing as society. It stands there as a notion. It should be, people should have seen immediately how incongruous it is to be speaking like this language of radical individualism. Instead of speaking about the republic that might be created, people spoke about getting a bit of the action. Suddenly it was no longer important just to have one house for shelter or to have another, whatever, for pension purposes or in case your family split up or somebody retired. But one needed a string of houses. And thus our property bubble was created within a bubble of speculative capitalism that had flowed on from an attack on the Glass-Steagall Act in the United States, which had introduced regulation following the Great Crash. When President Clinton gave in, after nearly several years of lobbying by those who said, we need to get rid of all of this regulation so that the instruments that the market needs can be pushed out and absorb what is regarded as an endless flow of credit. What was that? That was an irrational form of capitalism, and thus now one of the projects is the idea that can capitalism save itself again? I believe in Ireland that what we need as we move into this time when we will celebrate the founding of my own party, the Great Lockout, 1916, we need to think about an entirely different kind of society. And I am immensely practical about this. I can suggest, I have spoken and I have written elsewhere and will continue to do so, that what you would do if you wanted to deliver what I am saying in terms of political participation, in terms of administrative fairness, in terms of equality of the right to communicate, you would be talking about a floor of citizenship below which people would not be allowed to fall. You would have made secure children, for example, from the time of birth to very old people who wonder whether they will have to leave their home to die, as they frequently do within 18 months of being sent to a nursing home. You would have created possible that children going to the same class would be, for that period at least in their life, would be able to be equal in relation to education. That in addition to that, that people would have decent housing. That was the agenda, for example, when Sean O'Casey wrote about this, dissatisfied as he was, that James Connolly would take the citizen army with his egalitarian agenda and place it side alongside this nationalism. The lesson we had from that was that when in fact the egalitarian socialist agenda was placed side by side along with the nationalist agenda, it is the socialist agenda that would lose. That was in the dialogue just immediately before the meeting of the first Dáil, when Michael Collins told the IRB, you needn't bother with this, we're just going through with it. The fact is that we have now to realize, to say to ourselves, in relation not just for ourselves, but for Europe, and those of us that you hear say in Ireland, that you are in favour of a version of Ireland where no one will fall below that floor, where in addition to that, because it is like that, a highly participative, inclusive republic and so forth, it plays then, that is the one that was created in the vision of those who made out the case for Irish independence at the end of the 19th century into the 20th century. And it was that which was stolen from the people after the foundation of the state, when the Conservatives marched into all the principal professorships, education, philosophy, so forth. UCD became a stable for conservatism, for example. And thus, suddenly what you had was the continuation of an administrative nightmare, the robbing of the people of the delivery of the republic in relation to their ordinary lives. May I tell you what frequently people who say to me, there are those, and people like Slavoj Žižek and others, who suggest that things that if they are as I described them, that what is needed is a form of terror that would sweep everything away, and could we start all over again? There would be a terrible price paid for that. So therefore you have to put your faith in representative democracy. Well, then you do want it to work. And if you want it to work, you must be open to making the kind of institutional changes that are made. How could you carry this then? Well, there is need for a discourse. There is need for a discourse where we're able to talk about the vulnerabilities that matter, where there isn't a huge gulf between what we say in here and what is happening on the street, between people who wonder why it is that poverty has to reproduce itself in the same family from one generation to another, or one area to another, about why there is a difference between the quality of schools in one place and the quality of schools with another. God did not make it like that. Nature did not make it like that. The people in the so-called Irish Republic made it like that, and they maintained it like that. And I remember in County Clare, in many cases, when they could point to the 2 or 3 people who were in the Labour Party. They lived in a galvanised house, and people would say they're Labour, in the same way as they would say that they're kind of on the margins of society. And they were. So therefore what we have to do in relation to when we're thinking about this finance bill is necessary for this, that or the other reason. I hope that the new government realises that the model that is broken should not be repaired. That there is a discourse now that is wider, that is not only in Ireland but is in Europe, where citizens are saying what institutions might best express that which we wish to share with each other, where the concept of interdependency is accepted, where it would be regarded as obscene to say a radical individualism is what is important and which must drive us. And all that radical individualism, with its privileged view of professions and its sight-of-the-mouth politics in relation to benefit and privilege and so forth, is what has to be rejected. I think, therefore, when we're coming in relation to all of this has a practical expression in Europe. What is to be created if we create here a radical inclusive republic, we place it in a social Europe. And a social Europe which in fact accepted the interdependency of peoples rather than the aspirations of the elite property-owning classes of individual countries would be able then to be a region in the global world, in the global sense, that had offered guarantees about labour, guarantees about security, guarantees about peace. It would be a powerful voice, a big moral in the world in relation to having alternatives to war and allowing people their own paths to development. And that would be very attractive. I think then in relation to this particular bill here, the question that people ask is this: why? And the new government must address it. It must talk endlessly about jobs. if one loses one's job, if one is told that one has to be unemployed, this is the point. Everyone is very reasonable here. And I ask people to be at least accurate about one thing. There was one thing I will remember in this house here. It was the night of in September 2008, when the Labour Party was left alone. The vote was 124 votes to 18. We were the 18. We voted and we sustained it through 2 nights in relation to an unlimited guarantee that joined the debts of our speculative banks to the deficit issues in relation to the economy. And that is what we are facing here tonight. And really, I'm sorry that so young a deputy as Deputy Doherty would take it upon himself to suggest that the Labour Party was participating in any cabal. After all, it was he who said, on the 1st of October 2008 in the Senate, "This legislation is about more than the banks. It is about offering security to ordinary citizens and to investors in Irish businesses, which in turn means jobs. As the media speculated, other states may well follow this move by our state. My party welcomes this decisive move. I support this bill." With respect, it was a disaster. And I also say this now, and looking forward, that I hope that the discourse that we will have now will speak about inclusion. And there are people on all sides of the House. There are good pieces in this in this bill here. But there are ridiculous things. I could have given examples of what I meant by these phrases, political power and administrative power and whatever. I'll give you one. In my time in Long Inn here, people agitated, for example, for the equality legislation that was introduced by my colleague Mervyn Taylor. Now, people imagined when we had got the equality legislation that we had arrived at a particular point. But what the political science would have told you, that political power was useless unless you had administrative power. It was only when you could follow the equality legislation through with the Equality Agency, with Combat Poverty and all of those others, that you could administer the benefit that you had won politically. And that's the meaning of administrative power. And that's why we lost Combat Poverty to the right, why we lost the Equality Agency to the left, why you had all of the cuts. And that's what citizens in a republic want. They want political power and more of it. They want administrative power. And they want to communicate their vulnerability. And they want to be able to respond to each other's independence. And the very last thing they want is more of that terrible same that has brought us to this particular point now. And that is why I am proud to be President of the Labour Party. And if we have failed from time to time, what was never, ever in doubt is that we were speaking about a real republic that has yet to be built in this state.
Keep the timer up,